Evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Please be seated. You can be seated. All right. Hope everyone's had a great week since our last class, at least a great last few days here. We are going to be continuing in the Peaceful Solution, our Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification, Training Certification course. And we are, of course, in the Self-Control Unit, Unit number 3. And last class we were talking about, of course, we're in using self-control in our communication and our interactions, and we've been building up and understanding what communication is, how we interact, and how our character reflects the type of interactions that we do have. Last class we talked about, or we gave some examples of poor communication, poor interactions. We saw the example between Karen and Ann, if you remember. And we used the scenario there to show how not only when two people choose not to interact respectfully, the types of conflicts that it can cause, but also in the challenge that was given to the students, what can take place or the opportunities that could be presented if respect was shown, or self-control, which, of course, respect as a result, was shown as Karen and interacted or communicated, both in regards to the report that was damaged by the water, if you remember. And so we're continuing forward, moving forward here in this kind of section on how showing poor communication can lead to disrespect. Of course, we were dealing with the two sisters there in the last class, and we are still, in case you're wondering, we are still in the section or the portion of the book that will fall under Procedure 7, because if you remember, Procedure 7 covered pages 99 through 103, and we're picking up on page 102 today. So once we get to this end part here where this challenge is presented to this next scenario that we're going to cover, then we'll move to the next procedure. So let's look over to page 102 in your book, page 102. So like we were talking about last class, we see the problems that arise when you have poor communication, poor interactions between, well, in a situation like this, it could be two siblings. It could be classmates. It could be just somebody that you might interact with on the street. Now we're going to look at conflicts and authority, okay? Because as we're going to see here as we move forward a little bit, and this is something that we want to remind the students. A lot of times young people have the mindset, and I think to some degree I had that I've got a fly bothering me here. I had that mindset when I was younger, before I was educated, before I knew a little bit more and understood about life and how things operated. Young people have the mindset of, oh, I can't wait till I'm 18 and I can do whatever I want to do, right? I can't wait till I'm 21 and I can do whatever I want to do. I can get out of this house and then be free and live life the way I want to live it, right? But they quickly find out, as we all have, that there are still rules in society, right? There's still authority that has to be heeded to in society. And if a person goes out and just does whatever they want to do, doesn't follow the rules, disrespects the authority, doesn't yield to the authority that is placed and established there. Yes, these things are actually established, sometimes even by law. These things are established. Authority and so forth is established by law, okay? When they don't do these things, then they quickly suffer the consequence. And usually they're calling mom or dad to come and bail them out or something like that, because they were so quick, they were so anxious to get out of mom and dad's house. Now they're calling mom and dad, I guess I should have listened, can you bail me out or send me some money or whatever the case might be. All right. And so that's something that, it's great as we go through this class. We have to help the student to understand that things like rules, words like authority, and so forth, those aren't bad words, right? Society to some degree has presented these as negative words, as bad words in the minds of young people, and not just young people, old people too. People want to go out and they want to be rebels. They want to live life on the edge. They want to live life to the fullest. Rules are meant to be broken. And all these little statements you see on bumper stickers and things of that nature. They show the character of society and their willingness to not only break the rules, but also be public in their display of breaking the rules, showing everybody that, hey, I'm breaking the rules and I'm having a great old time doing it, right? They don't talk about all the broken bones and fines and tickets and, maybe jail time and money spent because they broke the rules. They just want to present the fun that you can have. And this is something that we have to caution our students on. And this takes us all the way back to the importance of getting the facts. Getting the facts and making sure you have correct, truthful facts before making a decision. Because just because something seems fun, right, doesn't mean that it's safe. Doesn't mean that it's beneficial. Doesn't mean that it's advantageous or it's going to help you to accomplish success in life. It might seem fun to jump out of a plane without a parachute. Somebody said, why would you jump out of a perfectly great operational plane? But people do it all the time. People do these daredevil stunts and these extreme sports, and they try to defy certain rules, even rules of gravity, and in many cases, people lose their lives as a result of it. Now, remember what we teach the young people in the elementary series: rules are there to keep us safe, okay? And when authority is there, following the rules as well, they're there to do the same job, okay? And so we kind of, it's important to reiterate that, like I just said, in the mind of your students. Try to get that out of their mind. You kind of have to reprogram that in their mind, because when people hear rules, they hear authority. Can we just go someplace where we could do our own thing, right? Can we just walk blindly through this mountainous region and not have to worry about falling off the cliff all the time, right? Yeah, you can if you keep the rules. And that's what the rules do. They keep you from falling off the cliff and hurting yourself, okay? So let's look at page 102, metaphorically speaking, in that cliff scenario there. And we're talking about conflict and authority. And it reads here, we are all born with a desire to be independent. That's in our genetics. Remember how we talked about character and what makes up your character in the character unit, that first chapter of the character unit. Part of it is your genetics, okay? And personality also comes out of that as well. But it's typical, right? It's kind of normal for people when they get to a certain age, they start to want to do things on their own, right? They want to become independent. They want to kind of get out and explore. It's like the toddlers when they get to the point where they can crawl, then they're crawling all over the place, right? They're exploring new things because for a few months there, first 8, 9, 10 months, depending on, not that long, but I'm thinking about walking. But for the first few months, for the most part, they had to depend on someone to carry them around. If they wanted to get out of the crib, mom or dad or someone had to pick them up out of their crib and take them to someplace else. If they were hungry, they couldn't just get up and go to the refrigerator and get something out of there to eat, right? They depended on someone to take care of them. And this is common with all of us, right? Whether we had a mom or dad in the situation, or we had guardians, or whatever the case might be, someone had to take care of us to get us to this point. Nobody can say from birth, I did it all on my own, right? I delivered myself, I brought myself up, and nobody can claim that I know of. I haven't encountered anybody who has. Anybody out there have? Okay, right? Even in the animal kingdom, you see that if a mother is taken away from the newborn babies very early in life, those babies typically die, right? Because they need the mother They depend on the mother to take care of them, to nourish them, to protect them from the dangers that are in the world and so forth. And, you can look at rules in the same way, right? That foundation is being laid from your parents at a very young age in nourishing and protecting and guiding you and teaching you to understand society and how it works and how to abide within the rules, so that when you are older and you do become independent, you can function in a safe manner. You can function in a respectable manner, in a way that doesn't bring harm to yourself or other people. But this is a desire, right? And some of these things are just inert, right? They just, switch turns on at a certain point of time in the life, and the child, all of a sudden, they want to start doing things. They want to start exploring, or they want to start striking out on their own, or whatever the case might be. Some of these things might be deliberate, right? Coming from the person. They see and they maybe possibly read about something, and so they start setting goals, right? Start setting goals for themselves in regards to achieving this independence. So this is evident in people of all ages, this desire to be independent. From the toddler who wants to pick out her own clothes, to the teenager who thinks his curfew is too early, to the adult who thinks he can run the company better than his boss, right? And we've seen these things before, coming from all facets of society. But people want to make decisions on their own and do things their way. Let's see here. This, I've probably read this before, but I'll go back ahead and read it again here. This word, and it's interesting, this word independent. Well, let me read the definition here first. And there's several meanings of it, the word independent, but it is part of it is not subject to control by others. Now, that doesn't mean that altogether there's, no one around that controls or governs life, because there's many aspects in which indirectly people have put guidelines and rules and statutes and ordinances and so forth within a city, laws to govern the citizens of that city. Now, there might not be somebody knocking on your door and saying, hey, this is what you can and what you can't do, but those rules are there and they govern what you can and what you can't do. Another part of this definition of independent is self-governing. Self-governing. Now, this self-governing ties into everything that's written in this book in regards to self-control. Self-governing, and the ability to govern, simply put, your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, okay? Not looking to others for one's opinion or for guidance in conduct, not requiring or relying on others as for care or livelihood. This is kind of, the point where a person gets to when they kind of transition from one stage of life to another. They leave the nest, so to speak, or in some cases they have to be kicked out of the nest because they're still living with mom and dad, perfectly capable of becoming independent and working, but they find that it's easier to just mooch off of mom and dad, nachos and Tang, that's the way of life. Tang, never mind. One of the responsibilities of those in authority, I put that in the wrong spot, I'm sorry. Not requiring or relying on others as for care or livelihood. So that's a part of that definition of independent, okay? And just keep that in mind in regards to self-governing, because this covers this ties into what we're talking about today, really in this whole book of self-control. All right, so let me go back to the book here on page 102. It says, people want to make decisions on their own and do things, notice in quotations there, their way. Do things their way. Now, conflicts can occur when somebody is being instructed by an authority to do things in a particular way, but they want to do it their way instead. So, Generally speaking, is there anything wrong with doing things your way? No. As long as it doesn't conflict with the instructions or the guidance of the authority. Okay? Now, as we're going to see here, there's always authority, but there's certain times when you fall under certain authority. Okay? When you're at work, you're under your boss's authority. When you're on the road, you're under the authority of, the Department of Transportation or the Sheriff's Department or the Police Department or whatever city that jurisdiction you're driving through covers. When you transfer into another city, you're no longer in this city's authority, you're under this authority, okay? So we have to take into consideration that, okay? When you're at home, well, you're not subject to following the rules of, the boss, right? Or the teacher when you're at school. Because now you're at home, you're in a different environment, and there's a different governing authority in that environment. So, no, there's not anything wrong with wanting to do things your way, per se, as long as, and this is what we're covering here, it doesn't conflict with the instructions that are being given by that authority. Okay? If you want to wash your bowls before you wash your plates at home, that's totally fine. Now, if you're working at a restaurant and the boss says, well, you've got to wash the forks, the silverware first, the plates first, next, and then the bowls next, well, you're underneath that authority. You've got to follow those instructions. You can't go, well, when I'm at home, this is the way I do it, and it seems to work out just fine for me. No, that's where conflicts arise, okay? And we have to be cautious of this because we can sometimes get in our mind thinking that we know better or we have a better way. And sometimes a person might have a better or more efficient way of doing something, but they don't have the authority to change the established pattern. There are ways to go about presenting ideas or suggestions to the company or the boss or whoever is in authority and saying, I found that this works. Is there a way that we can implement it? Or can we try this? Or can I try it to see if my productivity goes up and so forth, right? Go back into what we covered last class. Simply asking can reduce a lot of conflicts. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with having an idea or desiring to do a particular thing, but we have to take into consideration, everything, the authority, the rules, the instructions that are given, and just asking. Sometimes that can solve a lot of problems. Many times it solves a lot of problems. So when conflicts can occur when someone is being instructed by an authority to do things in a particular way, but they want to do it their way instead. And some examples you can give your students, you can kind of pick their brains to kind of see how do they see authorities, right? Who do they determine or who is in their mind an authority? And of course we have parents, teachers, maybe the principal or guidance counselor at school, a coach. These are common names you're going to hear at in the school environment. The bus driver is the authority. Now the bus driver is not the authority when you're sitting in the classroom, right? But the bus driver is the authority when you're on the bus. Why? Because remember what authority means. Someone who is responsible for and in charge of you. Right? They're responsible for your safety, your well-being, your health, and so forth. And when you're on a bus, how many have had the opportunity to ride a bus to school, growing up? Okay, I rode the bus when I was growing up in Cleveland, right about the time I was entering 4th grade, I believe it was. The Cleveland public school systems were incorporating desegregation in the school. It was actually still taking place in the early 80s. And part of the way they did that was they bused the students on the east side of Cleveland to the west side, and the students on the west side of Cleveland to the east side. So, we got bus rides every day to go back and forth to school. And I remember instances on the school. Now, there were rules. Right? There were rules that were set in place for riding the bus. And you can imagine, driving a bus that carries 40 or 50 people, there has to be rules established. And if anybody's ever worked around children, that they can get pretty rambunctious at times. Okay, and so rules are established on the bus. You know, stay in your seat. One of the things that was said was back to the green. That was one of the things that our bus driver made up, you know, that in other words, your back has to be to the seat. No turning around, no being on your knees, looking over the seat at the person behind you. They didn't have seat belts and things of that nature on school buses when we were growing up. So there were certain rules in place. You couldn't get up and just walk up and down the aisle or any of those things until your stop came, and then you had to wait till the bus come to a complete stop before you got up and then got off the bus. Well, those things were there because when you're in a situation when you're driving, and if the driver is distracted trying to control this group of children that are behind them, they could easily be distracted, drive off the road, and crash the bus, right? And many people could be injured as a result. So those things are set in place, and so when you're on the bus, yeah, you have to follow the authority of the school bus driver, right? You can't say, oh, you're not the boss of me. Yeah, they are the boss of you for that 15 or 20 or 30 minutes because they're responsible for you. And that's why it's important for them to understand what an authority is. The sooner they can break down that wall against authority being a bad thing, the more respectful and beneficial they're going to be as a member of society, in school, at home, in the street, wherever they might be. So let's look at the next paragraph there. It says, as you mature, you will have more opportunities to be independent and make choices on your own. However, it is a cold, hard fact that despite how old you are, there will always be authority figures in your life to guide and direct you. You think about it. When the person leaves school, can't wait to get out of school. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to college. I'm going to be an astrophysicist, you know, or an astronaut or whatever the case might be, or whatever a person might want to be. Well, they leave school. What are they going to have to do to accomplish that? They're going to have to go back to school again. Okay? I'm going to be self-taught. Well, okay. You're going to have to get your books, right? Well, who are those books written by? People who, remember, when they call on certain people to testify or to give an account or to give a speech about a particular subject, they recognize those people as either experts or authorities in their fields. Okay? People who know most of what there is to know about that because they've spent many years learning about it, or also, and usually that's coupled with it, practicing in that particular field. So even if you're going to be self-taught, you're still going to have to read and learn from the person who is the authority in that particular subject, right? And this is why we got to wipe that bad connotation of authority out of a person's mind, the young people's mind, and older people too. As young children, you had your parents to guide you. As young adults, you have your parents, teachers, coaches, to name a few. As adults, you will have supervisors, bosses, and directors to guide and direct you while you work. On top of that, one day you will be in authority. And so this kind of gets them prepared in their mind. And hopefully, you know, as teachers, we can remember we talked about compassion and we talked about empathy and so forth, and putting yourself in other people's shoes. And I remember the saying I've heard many times growing up, you know, I hope your children, not necessarily to me, but, you know, I hope your children treat you like you treated me, right? You know, because a lot of times y'all young people, they're pretty disrespectful to their parents. They gave their parents a hard time growing up, you know, and the parents were like, well, you know, I hope you get to experience what I experienced so you can see how difficult it is to raise a child that doesn't want to follow the rules, okay? But a person will one day be in a position of authority. They're going to have children, possibly have children, whether it's in their job. You know, they might not even have a position of a supervisor or a boss or a president or CEO of their job, but they could be in the job and somebody else comes to work and they're asked to train that person. Well, you've been granted authority by your boss to train this person in how to carry out their job. Okay? Now, notice here it says you will want the respect of those who you are And see, this even ties into the definition of authority. Part of that, who you're responsible, someone you're responsible for, or someone who is responsible for others. You will want the respect of those you are responsible for. Let's face it, authority is a fact of life and a very great thing. Not a bad thing, a great thing. And remember, we talked about getting the facts. The more and the sooner they can get and understand and accept these facts, the easier it will be for them to traverse through life, the difficulties, the ups and downs, and so forth, and accept and recognize that, yes, there are certain people who have authority. And even if I don't like that person, or like how that person's interacting with me, if they're the authority and they're guiding me in an instruction, and that instruction is not causing me to break the rules, to do something immoral, I need to follow those rules. Okay? Why? Because in doing so, you're respecting the authority of that person has in guiding and being responsible for you. People can change. And in a lot of cases, it's personality differences that causes some of these conflicts and character as well, as we learn about it. But people have the ability to change. So a person who might be kind of, stoic and doesn't crack a smile and, always seems to be just, straight-laced all the time and might be snappy with people, their hearts can soften and they can be a little bit more cordial and personable and so forth. But just because they're that way, does that make them a bad person because they don't joke around or, jibber jabber with everybody at the lunchroom, the coffee pot? That doesn't make them a bad person. That's just understanding that there are different personalities. And this is why we have to keep all these things in mind, because they all tie together, right? You can't just look at a person who's an authority and say, well, I don't like the way that guy looks. I don't like the way that guy talks to me. I don't like his voice. He's always, just, this is what you need to do, right? He never says, hey, how you doing? You mind doing this for me? Does he have to say that in order for you to follow his instructions? No. And remember, not everybody right now is being taught the peaceful solution. Not everybody is learning these character traits. Not everybody's learning the difference or the way to communicate and interact, practicing self-control and respect and so forth. But you are, and that's one thing that we encourage you to reiterate to your students. You are learning these things. So if you're given this great knowledge and you're learning how to communicate and interact, incorporating self-control in your communication and interaction, now you're responsible for it. You're responsible to put these things into practice every single opportunity that's presented to you. Remember, never an excuse to let your guard down, never an excuse to just, lash out, right? We have to set our minds in advance. We have to, think about things before they occur. Now, you can't plan every scenario or every situation, but we can plan how we're going to respond. We'll get into that a little bit later here as we move forward in this chapter. So we have here a scenario. This is another scenario, and this was included in the Procedure 7. The following scenario is a typical example of the effects of poor communication when interacting with an authority figure. And so, again, like we mentioned last class, you can take the time to use some volunteers, possibly just to even read this out. They don't have to necessarily act it out, but they can read it out and, get them to kind of, have fun with it and be lively with it. But we have an interaction here between a parent and a child here. So we have parent and Michael as the characters in here, and we'll move forward here in the reading of this scenario. It says, parent, Michael, I need you to help your brother clean out the garage. And in an angry tone of voice, man, that's not fair. He never helps me with my chores. Besides, I want to go play basketball. Can I do it tomorrow? Please do not speak to me in that tone of voice. I ask you to help your brother, and that's what I expect you to do. That's not fair. And he walks out of the room and slams the door on his way out. Children, people like slamming doors, man. I think that must really, in our minds, that really must make a statement, and just boom, slam that door. Anybody remember what type of anger style that is? Displacement, that's right. Taking it out of the, well, you guess you showed that door a thing or two, right? Slamming the door. And as parents, we don't like when people slam doors, or break things and stomp through the house and talk back and get snarky with you and so forth. So notice the parent here calling after him. He says, do not expect to go anywhere with an attitude like that. Okay, so he didn't want to do it. He wanted to go play basketball, but did he help his situation? Did he make a decision? Did he respond in a way to the authority that will enable him to accomplish the goal of him going to play basketball? No. In fact, not only did he delay him being able to go to play basketball, he might have had it cut off for who knows amount of time, a couple days, a week, or whatever the case might be, right? So these type of responses, they only bring about greater consequences, or consequences in general, right? But just to taking the time in it, and it is difficult sometimes. It does take training and it does take practice. We're not saying that you read this, well, stop, think, consider your options, then proceed. Boom, all right, well, I'm stopping and thinking, proceeding my options or everything now. No, it takes time. It takes effort, right? We've got to overcome these desires, these tendencies, these character traits, the influences, these genetics. These things have been in our genes for generations, right? You're not going to get rid of it in a week. But the more we read it, the more we accept it, the more we practice it, and the more we set our minds to become, to make these characteristics a part of us, right? We're kind of shaping and molding our minds and our hearts to be a peacemaker, for lack of better words, just to be a peacemaker. And in this situation, Michael could have been a peacemaker interacting with his father. He could have been a peacemaker interacting with his brother. I'm sure his brother would appreciate the help in cleaning out the garage, right? But he chose a different route, a different response. Notice the little saying in the bottom here. It says, obeying those in authority is a sign of moral strength. Moral strength. A little bit opposite to what you hear in society today. It's a sign of moral strength to obey those in authority. Nowadays, you hear when you disrespect authority, oh man, he's brave. You see how he stood up to the man? See how he stood up to the teacher? He stood up to mom or dad, right? Man, he's a brave one. He's got my vote. Is that what we want? People who reject authority? People who don't follow the rules? Could you imagine if that type of person was in a position of leadership over a nation, someone who absolutely disregarded the rules? I have a sneaking suspicion that nation would not last for a very long time. Or at the very least, they would not have many allies, okay? Because when you have a lack of respect for authority, you have a lack of respect for following the rules, you have a lack of self-control, who would want to ally or associate themselves with you? Right? Because you're kind of a ticking time bomb. You're a loose cannon, so to speak, right? And people won't want to associate with a person or a nation who has that reputation. But notice, I like what the father said there. Do not expect to go anywhere with an attitude like that. Remember, our attitude is the way we think and feel about something, okay? And, I like to ask the question or present the question when dealing with people, what's with the attitude? I don't have an attitude. Yeah, you've got an attitude. You're thinking and feeling a certain way, and it's reflecting on your face. I guess I should have said, what's with the negative attitude? Okay? Because it's like thinking. Well, you can't separate attitude from thinking because attitude is the way you think and feel. So you're always thinking, as we learned in the previous lessons, in and out of our mind. Thoughts are going constantly in and out of our minds. And those thoughts, they bring about certain attitudes. And if a parent or a teacher says something to you that you don't like and you don't have control over your thoughts and your feelings, that's going to be reflective in your attitude. So a person who can control their thoughts, can control their feelings, their emotions, and can control how they respond, this is a sign of moral strength because they're going to respond to their friends who might be trying to peer pressure them into doing something wrong, dangerous, breaking the rules, or even an authority who's telling them that they need to do a chore, clean a room, clean the garage, mow the lawn, whatever it might be. And this is a sign of moral strength. All right, so let's look over to page 103 here, under let's take a closer look. So we have this scenario here, the introduction of conflicts and authority, and showing how important authority is. In fact, it's a very great thing. And then the scenario and showing where that respect or self-control was not displayed in interacting with authority. So now we're going to take a closer look, because we have the same challenge presented here that we did with Karen and Ann. So underneath there it says, underneath closer look, without self-control, conflicts between an authority figure and those who they are responsible for can result in disrespect, misunderstandings, and arguments. You might even find yourself in deep trouble if you ignore the moral guidance you are being given. Right? Ignore. Now notice what it says here, and reiterate this to your students, because this is something that we vehemently express in the Peaceful Solution. We talked about this all the way in chapter 2 of the character unit in regards to the effects of character within the family. When a person's in authority and they're asking you to do something that does not break the rules, that does not bring harm to yourself or others, in other words, it falls into this guidelines of what we just mentioned here, this category of moral guidance, and that's there for a reason, right? Don't just skip over that as a teacher when you're reading this to your students. Moral guidance, morals pertain to the rules. So they're not going to guide you into doing something that will be immoral or harmful to yourself or others, because there are situations where parents or those who are in authority will try to manipulate, coerce a person, a child, into doing something that's immoral, using that authority to get them to follow that instruction. So this is where putting this information, these facts into the student's mind will help them to be able to easily be able to distinguish between if somebody's asking them something, asking them to do something that's keeping the rules, or asking them to do something that's breaking the rules, whether they should obey it or not. Okay? Although you might not agree with their instructions, the moral guidance that they're giving the person, you have the obligation to respect authority and use self-control to communicate your opinions appropriately. All right? The obligation, notice here, to respect authority and use self-control to communicate your opinions appropriately. Now, that doesn't mean right there at that very moment that you have to open your mouth and communicate your opinions to the parent, right? It's time for, help your brother clean out the garage. Well, Michael immediately communicated his opinion. His father wasn't asking for his opinion on cleaning the garage, what he thought about the matter, right? He asked them to help his brother clean the garage. Now, he wasn't asking him, help your brother to, set off fireworks in the garage, or help your brother to, napalm the neighbor's house, right? He wasn't asking him to do something that would bring harm to himself or bring destruction to property or possessions. He was simply asking them to help him clean, organize, and so forth. You must also be humble. Notice this word here, humble. A person who is humble is someone who is willing to accept instruction, willing to accept correction, willing to be guided. And remember, like we covered, a humble person does not always have the mindset that they have to be correct all the time, right? Because there could be a situation, as it was brought out by the previous teachers, where two people could have two different ideas, and both of those ideas are correct. Both of those ideas will work in that scenario. But there also has to be a compromise in getting things done, as long as it doesn't go outside of the moral standards or the moral principles that both parties should be following. You also must be humble and obey the instructions that you are Obey the instructions that you are given, even when you have a different opinion and would rather do something else. And I think every single one of us as teachers could easily relate to wanting to do something else other than what's instructed. Okay? Because let's just face it. I mean, all of us have work to do. I have a business that I run. There are aspects of my business that I like less. Okay? I don't really like doing certain things, but I have to do those things in order for the job to be done appropriately, to be done correctly, to give the customer the finished product that they are, paying me for. I can't go in and say, well, I don't really like doing that. I mean, I said that in the contract that I was going to do that, but I mean, I don't like doing it. It's my company anyway. I'm the boss, In that situation, your customer's the boss, right? They're paying you. You're working for them. You see, even a person who runs their own company has a boss. If they don't have those customers, they have no business, right? And then they're probably gonna have to move back in with mom and dad. Don't move back in with mom and dad. Okay. Think about it like this today, or think about it like this. Someday you will marry and start a family of your own. And this might be a place in the class where you get, yeah, I'm not gonna marry. I don't want to start no family. And we've heard it in classes before. Sometimes people aren't thinking that way. Oddly enough, it's mostly the guys. but most people will. Now, they kind of grow out of that mindset and that thinking. But they'll marry and they'll start a family of their own. How will you want your children to act towards you? And think about it. Get them to really think about it. I mean, a lot of cases you'll have the students in the class where they'll have younger siblings, right? And they might be given the responsibility by their parent to babysit a younger sibling, which means they're given the authority to be responsible for that younger sibling for a determined period of time, whether it's for the evening, a few hours, or the weekend. Most young people, teenagers or whoever they might be, they want their younger siblings to follow their instructions. They don't want to have a hard time out of their siblings. They kind of want to be able to do their thing, whatever that might be, and not have to worry about their younger brother or sister. Well, when you're responsible for someone else, you can't just set them off in the corner and ignore them, especially if they're young and they have a tendency to go exploring and climbing on things and turning things on, stoves and gases, knobs and things of that nature. You have to keep an eye on them and watch. So, get them to think, how would you want your children to act towards you when you're older, when you have a family and so forth. And this will kind of get the wheels a-turning in their mind. So this leads us into our challenge here, our challenge for the parent and Michael situation. And the instructions here are rewrite the previous scenario so that Michael is demonstrating self-control in the way he communicates with his parent. As you rewrite the scenario, think about how you would want to be treated if you were in a position of authority. A peaceful solution, notice here, is up to you. It's up to each and every one of us to choose how we respond. So, again, you'll take as much as you can from your students in regards to the rewriting of the scenario, and you might be able to, as a teacher, make a copy of this. Of course, this is in the student handbook. This scenario right here, it just doesn't have the answers in the parentheses there. Not parentheses. Can't remember what those things are called. It doesn't have the answers there. But as a teacher, this kind of gets, you can use these examples to spark the students' thinking. Okay. For example, Michael, I need you to help your brother clean out the garage. Michael's response could be, could I do it another time since the game is today? All right. Now you notice how different that is from the angry tone of voice. And remember what we talked about, that communication is not just the words you say. That's just 7%, right? That's just 7% of the communication that takes place between two people or a group of people. Your tone of voice plays a big part. Your body language, your facial expressions, okay? And this is what people are reading constantly. Whether a person realizes it or not, whether a person is trained in reading facial expressions or body language, to some degree, we kind of have an innate ability to see when someone's upset, right? When they're angry, when they're joyful, when they're willing, when they feel like they're being forced, right? We can see that in their body language, right? You can see that in a child's body language when you ask them to go and do their chores and they don't go skipping off, they shoulders go down and they start dragging their feet to the room and they're swaying like they have to drag themselves all the way to their bedroom, right? You can see those things. And even in the angry tone of voice, I can guarantee you there were certain expressions in Michael's face when he responded to his father being angry because there was something that he didn't agree with, right? I'm sure he wasn't, man, do I have to do that? I really want to go play basketball. I'm really angry now, Dad. No, I don't think so. Try to be angry and smile at the same time. Your brain just does not work, with your brain. Yeah, you can force yourself to do it, but there's a whole, we're not going to get into it, but there's a whole series of processes in your brain and in your subconscious mind and in your heart and so forth that when certain things are done physically, it's a trigger for certain emotions, okay? And this is what they tell people when they're doing telemarketing, which I know everybody loves, right? When you're on the phone, smile. Because that reflects in your voice, that reflects in your tone of voice and so forth. So here is another thing that the parent would say here. I can tell you really want to go to the game, but I need this done now. If you and your brother work together, it won't take that long. So you can see here, compared to the scenario that we read on page 102, there is not an escalation of a conflict, like we talked about with Karen and Ann in the first scenario that we had with them. There's a nice, calm, respectful, even tone of communication between Michael and his parent. And then Michael said, yeah, that's true. I didn't think of it that way. Okay, Dad, I'll get right to it. Okay, sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to kind of sit and reason things out. Sometimes we think we have to do something immediately, right? I think we've all had situations where we've thought, man, if I don't get this right now, if I don't get this thing right now, there'll never be another one like it. Or there'll never be another opportunity to accomplish this particular thing. Only to find out there's probably like several hundred that came up later on in life. But in our minds, we think if this doesn't take place right now, it's over. It's totally over for me. And this is the way a lot of young people think because they have such a short-term way of thinking. Right? They don't think long term like, man, really I can play basketball anytime, right? I mean, I have an opportunity to help my brother. Yeah, maybe we can talk about some things we like. Possibly after we're done, I can take him along with me too. Whatever the case might be, right? I might find some old things I forgot I had in the garage, right? Some old pictures of Dad when he used to have his, funny hairdo and his fly-wing collar, There might be all types of, it's all about mindset. Right? If a person has a negative mindset going into things, nothing's joyous to them. Nothing's pleasing to them. But if a person has a positive, optimistic mindset, they could be asked to do a various number of things, right? Scooping up mud and sloppy, dirty mud and putting it in on the back of a truck or something like that, right? They hate getting dirty, but at least I'm helping to clean up the environment. At least I'm helping to clean up this area here. This is clogging the waterways or clogging the storm drain or something like that. I'm glad to be a part of restoring proper flow. Or you can think anything, right? We have the ability to control our thoughts and as a result, our emotions and attitude about how we go about things. And lastly here, you see the response from the parent. Great. As soon as you're done, I'll drive you to the game. You see? So he elicited a reward, even though he didn't ask his father to drive him, he elicited a reward through his self-control, his exercising of self-control, and his display of respect toward the authority. And that's what we're trying to see. So this is a very simple scenario that is given to the students there, but this will get them to thinking. Because I guarantee you there's many situations that will arise, have arisen, or they might even be currently in at home where this very thing will take place. And hopefully they'll look at it and think a little bit differently about them and how they could respond and go about it in a more peaceful way. So let's look back to I want to go back to let's look back to lesson plan 4, page E, because we just completed what lesson plan procedure 7 left off there. And even though these pages here are not necessarily covered in procedure 8, we still want to go back and get our minds attuned to what we're going to, what direction we're going to be moving as we leave from procedure 7. So procedure 8 there on lesson plan 4, page E says, explain to students that until everyone learns to communicate with consideration, they are likely to encounter people who are out of control. And you're going to hear something pretty similar to that in the next unit on respect. Tell students that any situation where someone is out of control is a potential crisis. It's a potential crisis, a situation where there is no solution, right? Have students read the section entitled How to Respond When Others Lose Their Self-Control, and putting it all together, and that's found on pages 106 and 108, which we won't get that far today. But let's go back to page 104, and we can look at this this warning, because that, even though that page number isn't included in that procedure, but this is a part of what's in that procedure in regards to not everyone is learning to practice self-control here. And look underneath there, it says, warning, warning, warning. Keep in mind that not everyone has been taught the peaceful solution or knows how to treat others respectfully. And that's true. The statement goes, well, you ought to know better. Sure. A person ought to know better if they've been taught. If they've been taught, then yes, they ought to know better, right? It's just up to them at that point as to whether they want to practice what's better or ignore it. There will be those in authority who will take advantage of their positions. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. They might verbally, emotionally, and physically abuse others, sometimes trying to force them to engage in immoral acts. Read the following articles about one authority figure who abused his position and put a child's life at risk. And this was entitled Texas Boy Nearly Beaten to Death by Pastor here. And this is from Austin, Texas. Reuters says the Texas police on Tuesday sought a Baptist pastor and his twin brother on charges they used a tree branch to beat an 11-year-old boy nearly to death for misbehaving in Bible class. Investigators sought Joshua Thompson, 23, and his twin brother Caleb Thompson for the July 3rd incident, which left Luis Guerrero in intensive care for 4 days after broken blood vessels caused his kidneys to fail. Court records say both men are charged with a single count of felony to a child, according to an affidavit filed on Monday. Court records allege the 90-minute beating was to physically break, quote-unquote, Louis for lying. Joshua Thompson allegedly told the boy's stepfather afterwards. Joshua Thompson sits as pastor and holds separate services for the Spanish-speaking members of Capital City Baptist Church, of which his father is the pastor. Caleb Thompson helps out at the church. The child was at a Bible study program when he angered Joshua Thomas. Okay, well, what do we know about that, right? Did he anger him, or did he just choose to become angry, right? But of course, he wasn't taught these things, because this is what we're covering right here, people who haven't been taught the peaceful solution. Let's see here. Thompson so much that he was removed from the class. Joshua and his brother allegedly took Louis and Caleb to Caleb's office, Caleb Thomas's house, for the beating, where they turned up the radio to cover the child's cries, police said. The two men then took Louis back to his home, where they met his mother and stepfather, and said they had a big problem. Joshua Thompson told the boy's stepfather that he should beat Louis for 2 more hours to fix it. Do it, Thompson said 3 times, according to court papers. Thompson said that he would not allow Louis back to the church, so his bad example could not affect other children. After the Thompsons left, Louis's mother and stepfather discovered bruises and cuts covering the child's entire back, with bruises on his head, neck, backside, and legs. He said, "They hit me," Guerrero told his mother, according to the affidavit. He told his mother that Caleb Thompson held him face down on a bed while Joshua flogged him with a stick for about an hour and a half, court records say. The boy was allowed to take a break in the restroom during the beating, records say. Gerald Finley, a lawyer for Joshua Thompson, did not immediately return a call seeking comment. Louis Guerrero's family plans to file a civil suit against the Thompsons as well. And so we see here in that example, and there's many things that should be going through our minds as educators in the peaceful solution, but we see primarily in what we're covering here an example of a couple of men who were in a position of authority who misused that position and abused a child as a result, okay? Like they say, the punishment should fit the crime, so to speak, but beating a child for an hour and a half it's not going to make the child more obedient. It's just going to create a lot of problems. But at the same time, from what we've learned and what we understand in regards to everybody not being taught the peaceful solution, it's evident that these men obviously were in an environment or were trained or educated in some way where they thought that this was an acceptable way to deal with the problem. So it's not just a matter, when we look at this, we can't look at this with prosecutorial lenses, right? We have to look at this as this is a societal problem, and this is just one. It's a very sad thing that this occurred to this young man, but this is just one little piece, of this big pie of a lack of character education being taught. And it's not just starting with Louis there, okay, because he probably was being, young people are like that, disrespectful in the class, but also these Thompson brothers and probably their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, many, many, many generations back, who probably practiced this form of discipline, and it was passed down, and they thought that was the acceptable way to deal with problems. So as educators, we have to keep these things in mind and not really just point a finger, but say, this is where a breakdown in character education, this is what it causes, this is what it leads to, right? Because these men, they're a result. They are a result of not being taught moral principles at a young age, okay? Not the cause, they're a result of it. So these are things that we want to keep in mind, and we'll kind of leave off here as we finish up class in understanding not everybody's taught, right? But once they are, then they are responsible for what they have been taught in regards to these moral principles, practicing self-control, respecting authority, and of course, themselves and others. So we're going to stop on page 104 and pick up on page 105 with next class, who is going to be David. He's going to be the teacher for next class, and that is going to be Wednesday, 5/25, 5:30 Central Standard Time. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at next class. Have a wonderful evening.